In Dungeon Crawl Stone Soup, a bad strategy often begins as a fantasy. You picture the build, maybe you imagine the weapon, the spell school, the god, the branch order. Then the dungeon answers. The weapon doesn't drop, an orc priest gets line of sight, and his next smite is lethal. You have one potion for later, but later sounds like a luxury for people who survive the next few turns. This is where Emergent strategy begins. Sure, you've heard the slogans, you've attended the workshops. It's not because a leader says, "Oh, we're adaptive now." A planned strategy is the strategy you meant to execute. An emergent strategy is the pattern that forms after people act, react, adjust, and repeat those adjustments over time. Henry Mintzberg and James Waters gives us that clean distinction. Intended strategy is what leaders mean to do. Realized strategy is what the organization actually does. Emergent strategy is a realized pattern that forms without full prior intention. But as it turns out, bad patterns emerge in two. This discussion is about one of the strangest things I have seen in my own work, and then found all over the research I've been doing. Every team is trying to help, and the company still gets worse. What looks like flexibility or autonomy or hustling can make the organization worse. So the question becomes not whether strategy will emerge, because it will. The question is whether emergence becomes learning or whether it becomes discarded. So to give you a pinch of how it feels at the different levels, we're gonna use 3 games. Dungeon Crawl Stone Soup gives us the individual level, the person inside the emergent strategy as it's happening. Peak gives us the group level, separate people trying to make local choices fit together in a way that makes sense for them at the time. Crown of Greed, the fantasy kingdom sim, gives us the executive level, the bird's eye view, where you feel alone and out of control. Sure, you shape incentives, constraints, resources, and priorities, then watch the system respond. But is that really control? So later, our fictional manager, Rex, is going to walk into a company where everyone is trying to adapt and the company is still getting worse. Emergent strategy is not improvisation with better branding. What I found is that it's the pattern that forms when local adaptation gets captured, coordinated, or maybe even connected to direction. And it doesn't just form, it's accepted and carried forward. When that connection happens, the organization can learn from reality. As it turns out, when it doesn't, the organization just gets motion without strategy. That may sound convoluted, so let's start at the bottom, the individual. Let's take Dungeon Crawl Stone Soup, a game that I've won nearly every achievement with. Is not a game about having no plan. Good players plan constantly. They think about skill training, branch order, elemental resistances, what gods to worship, escape tools, positioning, and what your character can realistically survive. But Dungeon Crawl Stone Soup punishes fantasy planning. Unless you're Draconius and you're playing a Knoll, in which case you don't really have to plan for much. It punishes the player who falls in love with the run they imagined before the dungeon supplied evidence. A plan is a starting hypothesis. Reality gets a vote. Maybe you wanted a weapon or armor or spell that never really showed up. Me, for example, I pretty much rely on Hellfire Mortar to win most of my runs. A bad player treats the original idea like a contract. A better player keeps asking, what kind of run is this becoming? You're not merely reacting to one room. If you're really good at the game, you're updating how you operate from whatever situation you're currently facing. Many decisions are local in timing, but strategic in consequence. Sometimes, if you retreat early, the run will continue. Sometimes you'll refuse to retreat, and one bad fight or one bad vault becomes the end of your run. Individual emergent strategy feels less like strategy formulation and more like trying not to get killed by a room the original plan didn't imagine. Organizations create the same feeling. Let's say a customer has a constraint nobody documented. A system breaks under a severe load. A policy that made sense in a meeting creates a bottleneck in the physical work. The person closest to that pressure adjusts. They change the sequence in the production line, create a workaround, or call the one person who knows how the exception works. From above, this can look erratic. From the ground, it may be the only reason the run is still alive. Managers often make their first mistake right here. They see deviation and assume disobedience. And sometimes they're right. The workaround may be dangerous. The local fix may hide a bigger problem. But sometimes that deviation is in fact the evidence. It means the plan failed to account for a real condition. The front line did not create the surprise. They just happened to encounter it first. The person inside the churning chaos has what I'll call rich local data, but limited system visibility. They know the monster's in the hallway. They may not know what happens 3 floors later. So individual adaptation is necessary, but as it turns out, it's not quite enough. A salesperson can save a deal by overpromising. A supervisor can save a shift by bypassing a control. A support rep can save a customer with a workaround nobody else can reproduce. Each move can be rational locally in that moment, while the pattern becomes damaging to the organization as a whole. That is what we'll call bad emergence. It's not really random chaos. A real pattern is forming. It's just that it's the wrong pattern. So the dungeon crawl stone soup lesson here is precise. The front line needs room to revise policy when reality supplies new evidence, but the revision has to preserve future options. Step 1. Emergent strategy begins when individuals adapt under pressure. But an organization is not one player. Once more than one person is involved, your move affects someone else's route. This is where the game peak becomes useful. In peak, the central question is no longer, what should I do next? The question becomes, can the rest of us still use the route I just created? So if you're not familiar with it, Peak is a co-op climbing game where players scale a mountain, manage hazards, and rely on each other, and recover from mistakes that can endanger the group. Yeah, the surface is goofy. The bodies wobble, the falls look ridiculous, the panic even has comedic timing. But that doesn't weaken the analogy. You see, one player climbs first, and from their perspective, the route worked. They found a ledge, made the jump, and reached the next safe point. Then they look back, and the teammate below can't really follow. They have less stamina, an injury, heavier load, and the route was technically possible, but only for the person who climbed it first. A local solution is not a team solution until other people can use it. In Dungeon Crawl Stone Soup, your bad decision can kill your run. In Peak, your bad decision becomes someone else's rescue problem. One player climbs too fast, another player runs low on stamina, someone falls, and now the team is recovering instead of executing. You see, group-level emergence feels like peers trying to keep movement compatible while conditions keep changing. A team, as it turns out, doesn't really become adaptive because every person is free to make whatever separate local judgments they want, right? That ends up producing desync. A team becomes adaptive when separate judgments become visible, compatible, and oftentimes recoverable. You see, recoverability and repeatability are important. Follow me here. Can the team absorb a slip without blame, silence, or abandonment? Can the mistake become route knowledge? Can the person who reached the ledge leave something useful behind? In peak, that might be a rope, a warning, or the decision to slow down because one person's stamina problem will become everyone's crisis. In organizations, the rope is rarely literal. But how do you know how to hang a rope that'll help others? Well, you start with the opposite. Where did your team's adjustment create a problem for someone else? That's not generic communication. The team converts individual adaptation into shared movement. Real teams fail here constantly, my own included. Engineering sees reliability risk. Marketing sees launch timing. Operations sees capacity. Support sees customer pain before the dashboard catches it. You see, each group has local truth. You can't hang a rope that helps others if you don't know their local truth. The trouble begins when those truths collide. Engineering adds gates. Operation builds hidden buffers. A support writes its own escalation script. Everybody's solving a real problem, but the total system still gets worse. That is group disconnect, or a lack of communication. It has effort, local intelligence, and cooperation in little pockets. But what it lacks is recoverability and repeatability across boundaries. One team slips, and another team inherits the fault. One team climbs ahead, and the rest discover the route doesn't really work for them. And as long as we can't work together as the entire organization, we really haven't achieved anything we can call a strategy, emergent or otherwise. Peak gives us that second step. Individual adaptation has to become coordination. And I'm not talking about coordination as a vibe or workshop theater. I'm talking about coordination as a recoverable movement across the organization. Can the group name the slip before it becomes a rescue? Can a local workaround become a shared operating rule? Can a repeated fall become evidence that the route is bad? This is where emergent strategy starts becoming organizational. But even a well-coordinated team as a peer amongst other teams is still only one layer. If multiple teams adapt in different directions, someone above them has to keep those adaptations from fragmenting. This is where Crown of Greed comes in. We look at it from the CEO's or upper management's perspective. In Crown of Greed, you are the ruler. Then the game reminds you that ruling is not the same as controlling. You influence subjects, heroes, and the kingdom through gold, bounties, buildings, priorities, and incentives rather than direct unit control. So in this game, let's say you put down the bounty, you spend the gold, and you think you've made the priority obvious for your prospective heroes. But then a hero still does something that makes sense to them and infuriates you. This is what emergent strategy can feel like for the CEO. Even worse, the hero might not be wrong. From the top, normal strategy feels less like making the right move and more like designing the world in which other people make moves. The executive cannot read every local cue, resolve every peer conflict, or personally execute every adaptive choice. You tell people what to achieve and why, but not exactly how to do it. After which the executive works through levers, or levers. I've never quite figured out how people say that word. Metrics route attention. Bonuses change what people protect. Reporting cadence decides what gets noticed. Escalation rules decide which problems become organizational. This is the crown of greed problem. Let's say you have one priority in a scenario. As a gamer, you can say my kingdom has only one priority. You will still reward different priorities. You set out bounties and give orders. Kill the ogre, defend the convoy, research a new armor. 3 different priorities, even though you said only one. As a CEO, you can say customer trust matters. But sales gets paid on bookings, engineering gets judged on defect counts, and implementation gets rewarded for go-live completion. Then, just like the kingdom, the organization already knows that for them, different objectives matter. Now imagine that after all this, your hero comes up to you and says, you need to change your defending the convoy priority because we need more heroes. Wait, what? Or imagine your sales department saying you shouldn't reward go-live completion because you need more salespeople. That is what emergent strategy can feel like, an even greater restriction to the tiny amount of influence you have. Especially early in my career, I could physically feel this. I don't get to do or decide anything, and you're taking even this away from me. Please just leave me that last morsel of influence I seem to have. Of course, it became easier over time, but I still feel that frustration decades later to this day. You trade control for influence the higher you rise, and eventually even that influence seems to evaporate. Now, the executive's job is not to make every choice. It's more to shape convergence of conditions. In plain English, what I'm trying to say is make everyone move in the same direction. You need clear intent, shared understanding, disciplined initiative, and enough influence to synchronize without micromanaging. Orchestration says, here's the outcome, here are the boundaries, here's what we reward, here is where you must coordinate, here is how evidence comes back into the system. The leader doesn't eliminate emergence. The leader decides whether emergence has a channel. Through Dungeon Crawl Stone Soup, we have seen the snowball starts rolling for emergent strategy at the individual level. Through Peak, we have seen how it grows bigger and bigger through groups. And through Crown of Greed, we have seen how it finally needs to be directed by upper management or get crushed underneath its weight. So let's turn to Rex and see how all this would look in a modern organization. Today, we see CEO Rex in North Star Instruments. North Star Instruments is a mid-sized medical device IT company making diagnostic equipment for regional hospitals. Competitors are moving faster on software integration, so North Star builds a cloud connector. On slides, Rex's strategy is clear. Launch the connector, protect the accounts, win hospital groups, and prove North Star isn't falling behind. Elena, the CTO, is the one that created it and is the driving force behind it. She'll get it done. The executive team calls this adaptive execution. Then 3 hospital launches fail in 6 weeks. The connector works in demos and in the lab, but hospitals are not labs. Each hospital has different network rules, IT windows, security reviews, staffing constraints, and tolerance for downtime. Sales promised launch dates, engineering asks for cleaner defect reports, implementation builds local workarounds, support closes tickets that should have become product evidence. Everyone's adapting. Nobody's integrating. Rex's first mistake is to think the company has an execution problem. People are missing dates, customers are annoyed, meetings are tense. So Rex looks for the broken function. Is sales overpromising? Is engineering too slow? Is implementation too informal? Is support hiding the pattern? The search gets them nowhere. Every answer is partly true and still incomplete. So Rex starts at the ground level. He spends time with Mara, a field implementation specialist. Mara is North Star's Dungeon Crawl Stone soup player. She's not thinking about emergent strategy. She's just trying to survive the corridor with the ogre in it. A hospital installation goes sideways because the customer's IT environment doesn't match the rollout checklist. The checklist says the configuration should take 2 hours. It takes 6. The hospital network team is only available until noon. The connector fails during authentication. Sales promised a clean launch. The hospital administrator is watching the clock. Mara stops following the checklist in order, effectively creating a temporary workaround. She tells the hospital that the new feature will be activated after a second validation call. From above, that might look like deviation. From the ground, it's adaptive judgment. She preserved the customer relationship, prevented a failed connector from becoming a failed hospital day, and created information the plan didn't have. The rollout checklist assumed a cleaner IT environment than many hospitals actually have. Now Rex sees why his first diagnosis was too simple. You see, the front line is not refusing the strategy. The front line is encountering reality faster than the strategy can update. But did Mara survive the room while preserving the run? Not entirely. Her workaround helped the customer. The learning did not reliably move anywhere. She didn't post it in a support channel. It just stayed in her notebook. Product does hear about it 3 weeks later as a complaint, instead of evidence fed back into the loop for improvement. So North Star has an individual adaptation. It does not yet have emergent strategy. People are surviving rooms, but the run is still in jeopardy. Then Rex moves to the group layer. Product, engineering, implementation, sales, and support are all trying to climb the same mountain, but each group is using a different route. Engineering wants stability. Sales wants the quarter. Implementation wants readiness checks. Support wants fewer custom promises. And product wants more evidence before changing the roadmap. Every group has reasonable reasons, but that's the trap. Problem is not that one group is stupid. The problem is that their adaptations do not synergize. We love that word, synergy. Sales promises white glove support. Support creates informal priority labels. Implementation invents pre-call scripts. Engineering tightens acceptance criteria. Product asks for cleaner data before changing requirements. Now the mountain is full of separate ropes. Some help, some lead nowhere, some make the next climb harder. North Star has meetings, but the meetings do not create a shared movement. They create management theater. Each function reports what happened inside its own boundary. Nobody owns the collision between boundaries, so Rex changes the meeting. He doesn't ask who is behind, he asks, where does one team's adaptation become another team's rescue problem? The room gets less comfortable. Support says, when sales promises a custom go-live date, we inherit the panic. Sales says, when engineering solves problems late, we inherit the custom danger. Implementation says, when product does not define the minimum viable environment, we find out during installation. Engineering says, when field workarounds are described casually, we cannot tell which failures are product defects and which are customer environment problems. Now the group can see the peak problem. They are not short on effort, they are short on recoverability and repeatability. So Rex helps them build conversion mechanisms. What adaptation did your team make this week? Who did it affect? Should that adaptation become part of the operating model? Now the group layer starts working. The fall becomes information. The rescue becomes route knowledge. The workaround becomes evidence. Together, the teams figure out a way to do this better, but it's clearly not the adaptive execution so touted among the C-level executives. It looks more like checklist management at best, but it will prove that North Star is not falling behind because it will deliver on time. It's not sexy, everyone sees that it isn't sexy, but it will get the job done. Then Rex reaches the executive layer. The CTO, Elena, keeps saying, "I want everyone aligned around the cloud launch." Rex shows her the incentive map. Sales bonuses reward signed contracts, engineering reviews reward defect reduction, support is measured on a ticket closure time. Implementation is measured on go-live completion. Product is measured on roadmap delivery. Each metric makes sense locally. Together, they produce incompatible behavior. Sales pulls demand forward, engineering slows risk down, support closes tickets instead of preserving strategic patterns. Implementation finishes installs, product protects the roadmap from messy field evidence. Elena resists the diagnosis. So you're telling me my teams are doing the right thing and still creating the wrong result? Yes, Elena, exactly. The kingdom is not ignoring her speech. The kingdom is obeying the system. The executive system is producing misalignment. Rex tells her the hard thing. The strategy that we have made is not executable. The organization is not converting that learning into shared direction. So Elena changes the convergence conditions. Sales is no longer rewarded only for signed contracts. The incentive shifts towards qualified cloud deployments. Implementation gets authority to block a launch if the customer environments fail the readiness gate. Support changes its metrics so repeated field workarounds are not treated as isolated tickets. Engineering and product maintain a shared evidence log from field implementations. Then Elena defines executive intent in one sentence. We are not launching the cloud connector when we demo it. We are launching it when a normal hospital can adopt without heroic support. That sentence not only changes the strategy, it changes the system. Engineering what reliability means, implementation when to stop, support what evidence to preserve, and product what field reality must shape. Most importantly, it solidifies the emergent strategy as the dominant strategy. Due to this, North Star still has emergence. Mara still adapts in the field. Teams still coordinate through messy conditions. Executives still cannot control every local move. In the end, people are still willing to get the snowball rolling because they've seen it pay off before. The adaptations now have a channel. The learning has somewhere to go. The organization can tell the difference between a one-off workaround and a strategic signal. Bring the stack back together. In Dungeon Crawl Stone Soup, emergent strategy begins with the individual under pressure. You preserve options, read threats, retreat before damage compounds, and revise the plan around what the run actually gives you. This is adaptation created. In peak, emergence becomes a team problem. Your route has to work for people who are not you. Your mistake becomes someone else's rescue. Your rope matters because the next person has to climb. This is adaptation coordinated. In Crown of Greed, emergence becomes an executive problem. You can't grab every actor and force the perfect move. You shape the incentives, constraints, information flows, decision rights, and shared intent that make local action converge. What you can do is accept the emergent strategy and make sure you put your weight behind it. Sometimes you don't have to motivate others. Sometimes they motivate themselves. This is adaptation channeled. Emergent strategy is not chaos. It is not mere flexibility. It is not permission for every team to do whatever helps its own metric. Emergent strategy becomes real when repeated local adjustments form a pattern the organization can recognize, test, and connect to direction. You can test that in your own organization. Can frontline people explain their trade-offs? Can teams recover without rescue from above? Can executives state the desired outcome without prescribing every move? Do incentives reward truth-telling or only local wins? Where does integration? If the answer is nowhere, the organization does not have emergent strategy. It has motion, effort, people surviving rooms, people slipping off ledges, and bounties pointing in different directions. Hopefully. But in bureaucratic organization, even coordination on the group level fails, and it is every man and woman for themselves. The individual adapts, the group coordinates, the executive orchestrates. When those levels connect, reality changes the organization's operating system. When they don't connect, everyone keeps reacting, and leadership wonders why all that effort never became strategy. That is why these three games work together. Dungeon Crawl Stone Soup gives us the pressure of the individual. Peak gives us the dependency of the group. Crown of Greed gives us the frustration of the executive. Together, they show why real emergent strategy often does not feel like strategy while it's forming. It feels like surviving the room, pulling someone back onto the ledge, and posting the bounty before realizing the kingdom still has its own logic. Only later can you see the pattern, and the managerial question is whether that pattern deserves to survive. I'd like to take the time to thank everyone that's joined the Discord where we discuss these topics before they go live. Please like, share, and subscribe if you found any value in this video. But if you really want to help the channel, click on one of these videos. We'll see you next week with new insights and games here on Tactical Mindscapes. Thanks for watching.